Joining us now is Bishop Talbert Swan II, President of the Springfield Chapter of the NAACP. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Appreciate your time. Always good to have you in.
Good to be here, Jim.
18-year-old Michael Brown, a young black man, he's shot and killed by an officer, Ferguson, Missouri, questionable circumstances. Grand jury refuses to indict. Eric Garner, black man, died last summer in New York City after police were arresting him for illegal cigarette sales. All on video. It's heart-wrenching to watch. He's apparently in a chokehold, which, as I understand it, is against New York City Police Department practices and procedures to begin with. He keeps telling officers, I think 11 times, he says, I can't breathe. It's ignored. A grand jury refuses to indict. A black child in a store in Ohio holding a pellet gun is shot by a white officer. Bishop Swan, you have spoken out calling these and other similar incidents legalized lynchings.
Well, first of all, you would think that any time someone loses their life as a result of inappropriate behavior by law enforcement, that there would be some consequences. Each one of the cases that you mentioned and so many more happen under very precarious circumstances. And then when you look at how they're dealt with in terms of the investigation and the fact that they go before grand juries, which is really an unorthodox way of dealing with these cases. Usually when there's sufficient evidence that a charge should be filed, a district attorney goes ahead and files the charge, and then it's fought out in a court of law. Usually a district attorney, when he wants someone to be charged with a case in a superior court or a capital offense, he brings it to the grand jury after the person has already been charged. So to bring it before a grand jury, and you've heard the saying as well as I have, that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. It's not a high threshold for a prosecuting attorney to get an indictment from a grand jury. And the fact that these cases did not render an indictment speaks to me in terms of whether there was ever a desire to prosecute these police officers. And it also speaks to me about the inherent unfairness in the criminal justice system.
I heard one police official, I believe in New York City, commenting on the Eric Garner, the chokehold incident, and he said, if you're being arrested, don't resist. Now, it may sound like sensible advice to many of us, but I wonder if it really points out the gap in understanding and experience here, because the advice, don't resist, perhaps doesn't seem so easy to a young man of color who wonders, okay, what happens when they get the cuffs on me and I'm in the police van or the back of the car or at the cell block?
So many instances where someone has lost their life in police custody, someone was abused in police custody, someone was hurt in police custody, and yes, that's in the back of every black man's mind when he's being arrested. What will happen to me at the end of this circumstance? When you look at the Eric Garner case, it's hard to tell that that was ever even an arrest. No one said you're under arrest. No one said what he was being charged with. He's having a conversation with a police officer, and the next thing you know, someone's choking him, and a bunch of officers are trying to put cuffs on him. What was he being arrested for? It came out later that they were talking about loose cigarettes. He was under suspicion of selling. But by and large, there's a huge amount of distrust within communities of color of law enforcement. And really, we are very concerned when our young men have to face police officers.
You said something in one of your writings, excuse me, about these cases that I think if anybody reads this and isn't affected by it, I can't imagine. You basically said any black man in this country takes his life in his hands when he walks out the door of his home.
Every morning when I get up to leave, I take my life into my hands. My sons take their life into their hands. I've had conversations with my 14-year-old that my white counterparts never have to have. I have to teach my 14-year-old how not to get shot by the police, how not to get abused by the police. I have to teach him that when you're confronted with a police officer, here's what you do to stay safe. Most white fathers never have to have that level of a conversation. And it's a shame in communities of color where you're doubly concerned. A, you're concerned with what may just happen out on the streets because of random crime and violence that exists in urban centers in the first place. And then you're also concerned not only with what might happen if my son encounters a criminal, you're concerned with what might happen if he encounters a police officer.
In the Ferguson, Missouri case, and I realize we could take every one of these cases apart bit by bit. The police officer said, "I thought my life was in danger." So this was a very big man. Well, it turns out they were about the same size, both about 6'4". He said, and this is a case of he said, and some witnesses said other things. We can't hear, obviously, from the young man who was the victim. The police officer said it looked like he was going into his waistband. I thought he must have a gun. There had been some earlier trouble, I guess, involving this young man. All of this is in dispute, but police officers say, what do we do? Because certainly there are African Americans, there are whites, there are Asians, there are Latinos who do commit crimes. I mean, nobody disputes that. But what is there just a sense to you that it's shoot first, ask questions later?
Well, the whole notion that someone should be able to use deadly force when they feel threatened, I think needs to come off the books across the nation. It is so subjective that anytime who's to say whether someone actually felt threatened or not? That's completely up to that person. Mm-hmm. So when you have a case where you have James Holmes walk into a theater in Colorado and kill 12 people and injure 58 others, has on body armor, has 2 assault weapons and grenades on his possession, he can be talked down to get into the back of a police car and is now on trial. A black man who is unarmed, who has a wallet or a key or a bottle of medicine, is more likely to get shot than a white man with an assault rifle and grenades. There's something wrong with that when that's the reality in our nation.
Are we perhaps, we talk about teachable moments. I wonder, is this what I'd like to think of as a learnable moment for a lot of people to sit back and say, there is a difference clearly in the way authority figures, police officers, deal with young men of color than with white men more often than not?
Yeah, I think the lesson that should be learned is that there is a problem that still exists. W.E.B. Du Bois said years ago that the problem that we have in America is the problem of the color line. And here we are a century later, and that's still the problem in our nation. And I think the bigger problem to me is the willingness of so many to deny the experiences that people of color face every day. To say, hey, there's a black man in the White House. Hey, you guys have a black governor. Hey, there's other black people that have made it, so racism must not exist. That denial completely desensitizes people to people's real life experience. Until we can get to a point where we can admit that other people actually experience these types of things, we'll be at that impasse and the nation will remain polarized and divided.
Is there, do you think, and your experience certainly is central to this, your own personal experience, you talked about your sons, is there just a lack of appreciation and understanding for people who don't experience it? I mean, we've heard people talk about driving while black. A black man, I don't know a single black male who hasn't been stopped at some time for something very silly or for no reason at all, just because police thought, what is this person doing driving through this neighborhood?
Yeah. And we've all experienced that. I've experienced being stopped because a report went out that someone suspicious was driving around. I was driving around in my own neighborhood before I purchased a house and was pulled over. I was at gunpoint standing at the University of Massachusetts as a student because I was a black man and they were looking for a black man. So what black man has not experienced fitting the description, being deemed as being suspicious, being followed around a store? I don't know who has not dealt with that experience. The problem I have really is most white males would never tell their son if he came home and said, hey, Dad, I'm being harassed at school, I'm being bullied. He would never say, son, that's a good school, it's in your imagination, go back to school. He would never tell his wife, who would come home and say, I'm being sexually harassed at work, I'm not being treated fairly. He would never tell her, go back, that's a good place to work, just go back, you're imagining that, it doesn't exist. But yet and still, when people of color say, this is what we're experiencing on the job and in various areas of life, to be told, no, racism doesn't exist. Those are figments of your imagination. You're making it up. You're playing the race card. Go back and just be glad you're in America. It's quite insulting.
Well, a lot more to talk about as we think about this. Bishop Talbert Swan, thank you for putting some perspective on these important issues for us.
Thanks for having me.